They called her the shooting teacher, and with a joking tone. They said she only knew the theory and had never held a real gun. A rookie smirked, tossed a coin into the air, and challenged her. "If you hit it, I'll clean guns for a month and then one shot. Think you've ever been underestimated?" Listen to the rest of this story. Early morning at Fort McCoy, a training base on the western edge of Wisconsin. The air was still foggy and damp. Dew clung to the grass on the training field, under the mud-streaked boots of dozens of recruits fresh from morning PT. A light breeze stirred the flags in the corner of the yard, most still half asleep. But their eyes sharpened when a figure appeared at the far end of the field. A woman, no rifle, no rank insignia, just a plain uniform with a pocket bulging with papers. Small frame, straight back, hair neatly tied back and silent in a way that momentarily made the whole field pause. They knew her, not because she stood out, but because she was always there, on time, quiet, unmissable. They called her the shooting teacher, but the name carried more jest than respect. To these young men, new to their uniforms, a woman lecturing about bullet trajectories, gravity, and wind errors in theory sounded like grammar lessons in a world of live ammo. One young soldier turned to his buddy, half laughing, half yawning. "It's her again. Bet today's about aiming without shooting," his friend replied. "Heard she taught at the University of Kansas, physics of firearms. Wonder if she's ever been on a range." The group chuckled. In the military, silence is often defense, but today, noise was their weapon to mask disbelief. They were talking about something strange, a woman, no body armor, no ammo belt assigned to teach them how to shoot better. She stepped closer, her voice clear, not loud, not soft. "This morning, we'll continue with bullet flight and gravity's impact beyond visual range." Who remembers the wind drift error from the left at 300 yards? A few heads dipped to notebooks, and a few eyes wandered. A tall recruit, buzz-cut, sitting in the front row, crossed his arms, lips curling slightly. "Ma'am, theory sounds fine, but if you shot for us, things might get a lot clearer." She didn't react. She glanced at him briefly, then turned to the whiteboard, continuing to draw a bullet's trajectory model, her voice steady. "That's why today we'll learn to calculate errors in real-world conditions." But the whispers didn't stop. Another recruit pulled a silver coin from his chest pocket, flipped it high, catching it on the back of his hand like he was performing for the class. "Bet you, ma'am, if you hit this, I'll clean guns for a month. You miss, you wipe the board every day." The group burst into laughter. The sound wasn't malicious, but it held no respect either. And she didn't smile, didn't get angry, didn't lecture on it. She walked slowly to the wooden rack at the end of the field, where 10 Springfield M1903 rifles sat ready for the afternoon's practice. Her hand glided over each one like someone choosing a book, then stopped at the 6th. She lifted it, slid the bolt open, checked the barrel, and snapped it shut with a light flick of her fingers. The field fell silent as if someone had cut the sound. The coin-flipping recruit glanced at his buddy, eyebrows slightly raised, then said nothing. Planting the coin atop a wooden post at the far end of the field over 300 yards from the firing line, a way to turn a joke into a real challenge. No one spoke. Eyes began to watch. Hands rested on thighs. Quiet, as if instinct told them that this moment wasn't for joking anymore. She walked to the firing position. No rush, no show. She lay down on the damp grass, spread her uniform's hem under her elbow, and settled into position like she'd done it 1,000 times. When she pressed her cheek to the rifle's stock, the wind seemed to stop for those watching. The air no longer smelled of earth, but of silence, of waiting, and of something they'd never seen before. She said nothing as her eyes locked on the front sight. A faint breeze brushed the hair by her ear, and the flag in the corner of the field fluttered slowly. The young soldiers held their breath, unspoken. Their eyes followed as if watching a play where the lead actor made no grand gestures, just the motion of cocking the rifle, the barrel steady as a rock anchored in a field. Time seemed to freeze, longer than the morning fitness test, longer than the dull theory lesson just passed. A moment no one expected from the woman they'd dismissed as the bullet-counting teacher. The shot rang out. Singular, crisp, not booming, not dramatic like the movies, but low and deep like a knock to the chest, then fading. No one laughed. No one clapped. Only one other sound followed the faint clink of metal hitting the gravel ground. The young soldier, the one who'd tossed the coin, stood frozen for a moment. Then, as if snapped from a dream, hurried toward the wooden post. His hands lifted the coin, trembling slightly as if afraid it might dissolve in his grip. He turned back slowly, lacing half the coin in her hand, his eyes avoiding hers. His mouth opened, but all he managed was a mumble. Split in two. Really, ma'am? She didn't reply. She stood, brushed the grass from her elbow, and returned the Springfield to its original place. Every action was calm and deliberate, as if nothing remarkable had happened. She walked back to the lecture table, opened her notes to where she'd left off, and continued. As I was saying, at 300 yards, wind can cause a drift of up to 4 inches if the speed exceeds 10 knots. That's why we need to understand errors before pulling the trigger. This time, no chairs shifted, no one scratched their head, rolled their eyes, or whispered. Everyone leaned forward, wrote, took notes, scribbled fast, as if every word she spoke now carried double the weight. Because now, they'd seen she didn't just talk. She knew, didn't just teach, but proved. And without a single boast, one shot was enough to silence them. They started noticing things they'd overlooked before. The way her hand didn't shake, the way she controlled her breathing, the way she glanced at the flag before aiming. Every technical detail they thought belonged in textbooks. She'd mastered with effortless precision. She didn't mention she'd worked in Kansas military aerodynamics lab, nor did anyone know she'd trained sniper candidates for national competitions. Her record wasn't posted at the field's gate, and she never brought it up. The lesson continued. No noise, no interruptions. The young soldiers began asking about the Coriolis effect, how altitude affects ballistics, and how to shoot when humidity shifts. She answered with precise words, a calm gaze, and no trace of smugness. And when the morning bell rang signaling the end of theory class, no one stood first. They stayed seated, waiting for her to close her notes, waiting for her to leave before slowly rising. She didn't teach them to bow to authority. She taught them with one bullet and a broken coin that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the sound of the shot, but the silence that follows it. From that morning on, no one called her the theory teacher anymore. It wasn't spoken, but it showed in how their eyes followed her as she stepped onto the training field, no longer with doubt, but with respect. They tried clumsily to hide under calm faces. She still arrived on time, still carried her stack of notes, still stood quietly by the weathered whiteboard set up in the yard, but now, each step she took made the rows of recruits straighten without a word. On the afternoon of the third day, the wind grew colder. A northern chill swept in, scattering leaves across the training ground. during preparations for live-fire aiming practice. She stood in the center of the field, checking each rifle. Her hands moved lightly over ammo boxes like an old smith inspecting a blade, her eyes scanning barrel alignments as if she could see into the essence of each lead round. The soldiers watched, no longer jostling with jokes but silently observing. A shy recruit stepped forward, holding an unchecked M1 Garand with both hands. "Ma'am, could you check mine? I think the barrel was slightly off yesterday." She didn't answer right away. She took the rifle, flipped it gently, inspected it, nodded once, and whispered a few instructions. The soldier thanked her, walked away without looking back, but gripped his weapon tighter. Afternoons like that repeated, quiet but weighty. During each practice, she stood behind them, not holding a rifle, just watching. When needed, she leaned down, adjusted a shoulder for proper height, and lifted an elbow to steady a shake. No scolding, no long lectures, just a short, slightly off-center, winds shifting. And then that soldier hit the target's heart, one late afternoon as the sun dipped behind the pine ridges. Training ran longer than usual. She lingered, carefully cleaning a rifle with a faulty trigger. The field was empty. A soldier quietly returned, standing behind her, silent at first. Then he spoke. "Low and slow, ma'am. Have you ever been in combat?" She looked up, her eyes meeting a rare hesitation in his young gaze. She didn't answer immediately. Then she set the rifle down and brushed her hands on her pants. "Some places, where guns don't need to fire, are the most dangerous." He nodded, asking no more. She said nothing further, but in that brief glance, something shifted. No longer student and teacher, but person to person. Someone who realized she knew more than what was written in her notes. Rumors began to spread. She'd been invited to train special forces, and she was among the first to test silenced sniper rifles. That once, she joined an observer team in Montana's western mountains for a cold-weather ballistics simulation. But they were just whispers, no one verified. And she never confirmed. Because what she did each day was still just standing in the yard, correcting postures, explaining bullet spin, and slowly writing formulas on the board. One day, the range commander, Captain Hardin, appeared during theory class. He was a veteran officer, face creased from years in the sun, voice hoarse from decades of shouting through megaphones. Standing at the back, he crossed his arms. Watching. She taught as usual. But when she reached the part about altitude and thin air affecting trajectories, he stepped forward. "Suppose humidity's 70% and a 12-knot crosswind comes from 2 o'clock. What's the drift at 600 yards, ma'am?" The class held its breath. The question wasn't in the curriculum. She turned, wiped the board slowly, then wrote in chalk, 2.7 inches right. "If the bullet's muzzle velocity is 2,900 feet per second." The commander nodded slightly, said nothing more. But after class, as the recruits dispersed, he approached her table, placing a small badge down the emblem of the Midwest's elite marksmanship training team. "They don't give this unless you fired over 5,000 rounds in a year." Then he walked away. No one overheard. But those nearby understood a confirmation that didn't need a shout. Because truth, like a bullet, doesn't need a megaphone to be heard. It just needs to hit the mark. From that day, the jokes vanished completely. No one challenged her. No one asked if she'd ever shot for real anymore. She remained the teacher, but her voice, her gaze, her quiet presence became part of the range. Like the stubborn grass by the targets, like the morning dew. Unassuming. But no one dared underestimate her. And in the hearts of those young soldiers, they began to carry her image, a reminder of precision, of resolve, and of a strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. November brought a biting cold sweeping down from Lake Michigan. The Fort McCoy training ground grew quieter than usual. The afternoon laughter gone, replaced by steady footsteps and the whistle of wind through the flagpoles. The distant trees stood bare, rustling like whispers from the frozen earth. She was still there every day, sometimes at dawn when the light wasn't yet strong enough to cast a shadow. Ballistics tests were now held regularly. Small group drills, shooting at targets in shifting weather, firing at moving marks on offset paths. She was always there, not on a platform, but at their shoulders, adjusting a breath, a sight's tilt, a trigger's pull. No one expected the real test to come on a night that was not on the schedule. That night, the range lights went dark. An alarm blared from the Northeast Command Post. A group of soldiers on night watch reported a suspicious signal at the camp's edge. All rapid response teams were mobilized. It was later confirmed as a glitch in the light sensors, compounded by a herd of deer crossing the northern woods, tripping thermal signals. But at the time, no one knew, and no one dared assume. Amid the chaos of running feet, crackling radios, and rifles clicking off safeties, one person didn't rush. Her. Standing in the center of the training field, eyes fixed on the forest, her silhouette cut a lone line on the cold concrete, like a single stroke in a frantic sketch. The first to reach her was Corporal Bell, the rookie who'd once challenged her with the coin. Now, rifle in hand, sweat beading on his brow, his voice was different. "Ma'am, can you help my team navigate?" "We're short an observer." She nodded. No questions. She pulled on a thick jacket, grabbed an M14 propped near the observation post, checked each round swiftly, and joined the three-man team. They didn't call her teacher anymore. They signaled with their hands, and she understood like a familiar link in their chain. They moved through the eastern tents, veering into dense woods. No lights, only faint moonlight through the branches. The team stayed silent, and each step was laced to avoid sound. Rifles were loaded, but their hearts carried an unspoken tension. At that moment, a small noise cracked from the bushes 40 yards away. Everyone froze. Fingers tightened on triggers. But she was the first to kneel. Her eyes scanned through the infrared scope, and within seconds, her voice cut through low, clear, unshaken, not human. Heat signatures too low, moving steadily, likely a large animal. No one asked how she knew. They trusted. Minutes later, it was confirmed. A startled herd of deer burst through the brush, fleeing the other way. No one fired, no incident. But if one hand had twitched, Miss Red pulled the trigger first. The consequences would have been unthinkable. When they returned, the camp lights were back on. The alert was downgraded. Everyone resumed positions. The range commander filed no report. But those in the team that night, they never forgot. They didn't forget the woman who didn't flinch in the dark. Didn't forget the calm voice in the tensest moment. Didn't forget how she looked through the scope not just to find a target, but to rule out a mistake. The next morning, theory class went on as usual. She lectured on minimum safe distances in low-light settings and thermal reflection errors with infrared scopes. She didn't mention the night before. No one asked. But as she turned to write on the board, the recruits exchanged glances, not as students to a teacher, but as people who'd stood together on a night when calm mattered more than a bullet. From then on, they learned from her not just how to shoot true, but how to stand steady in chaos, in silence, in darkness. They understood that hitting a coin might be a kill, but not faltering on the edge of life and death that was character. A character no curriculum could capture. And she, never raising her voice to teach, had taught them that lesson, with one night, one sound, and silence. The final week of training passed in a hushed, focused calm. Mornings grew colder, the ground hardening underfoot, frost clinging thickly to rifle grips. She was there as always, checking each weapon, jotting precise notes in her worn notebook. But the change wasn't in her steps or the weather, it was in their eyes. The soldiers no longer saw her as a teacher, but as an inseparable part of the range. She wasn't there to lecture, but to be present when it mattered. Not to prove, but to steady those about to step into places they might not return from. That morning, the class split into 3 groups for a tactical drill on moving targets. A major test. Time was tight. Headwinds. Targets shifted every 30 seconds. The difficulty was a notch higher. The range taut as a wire. They aimed not just at targets, but at each other's precision. With one misstep, the team lost points. The air was heavy as lead. She stood at the observation point, not intervening, but her eyes tracked every move. As the final team took their turn, a problem hit. The newest corporal's M14 jammed mid-round. He fumbled, yanking the bolt, but the round stayed lodged. The supervising officer called a halt, signaling for technical support. In under 3 seconds, she was at the soldier's side, light as a breeze. No words, no rush. She knelt, her left hand steadying the rifle's balance and her right hand working the bolt in a fluid motion. A dry click sounded. The round popped free, dropping to the dirt. She handed the rifle back, tapped the soldier's left cheek, and said softly, "Next time, check the safety before you pull." Her voice wasn't a reminder. It was a tether, keeping him from slipping in a moment of panic. The test ended. No records were broken, but no one made a critical error. The team finished in silence, on time, on target. In the quiet glances of the soldiers leaving the range, something weighed heavier than their rifle stocks. No pressure, but awareness. Sometimes, one person doesn't need to fire to save a team. She moved among them with no rank insignia or gleaming medals. Yet her steps left a deeper mark on the ground than anyone's. Because every time she stepped in, a technical flaw was fixed, a miscalculation corrected, a soldier spared a mistake. That afternoon, as the unit gathered under the fading sunset for the course's final review, the lieutenant colonel spoke. His voice was firm, thick, and solid like a spent casing hitting a wooden table. "None of you are perfect marksmen, but you've all passed the most important test, control. And no small part of that came from the one you once called theoretical." Every eye turned to her, but she stood still, arms crossed, gaze steady, no bow, no smile, because she wasn't there for recognition. She was there to do right. After the ceremony, as the last light faded behind the old pines, a group of young soldiers approached her. In their hands was a small box wrapped in worn khaki cloth, holding a decommissioned bullet, its tip polished smooth, engraved with a single line, "The Silent Lesson." They handed it to her, but there were no speeches, just stood, then turned away one by one, or she didn't speak, didn't refuse. She took the bullet, turned it lightly in her palm, and slipped it into her chest pocket like tucking away an unspoken promise. That night, she left the range late. Winds swept the empty field, carrying the scent of earth, gun oil, and echoes of long, nameless days. Over her shoulder was her old canvas bag, and in her chest pocket a bullet that never needed to fire. But it struck the deepest part of those who once thought they understood war. She wasn't a legend. She didn't need to be. Because on ranges like this, sometimes what's needed isn't a named hero, but a teacher no one needs to recognize, yet no one can forget. The morning after was the final training session, a free-form shooting drill. No curriculum, no senior oversight, just the young soldiers and her. The sky was lead gray, the wind swirling unpredictably, the ground damp from a night of heavy dew. The flag at the range's corner clung limp to its pole like a last whisper of the coming winter. They say the final days pass lightly, but that morning no one felt light. No one joked, no one lagged. Everyone was there on time, silent. She appeared a few minutes later. The same old uniform, unchanged, except for one thing, the engraved bullet, the silent lesson now strung as a pendant, hanging quietly on her chest. She didn't mention it, no one asked, but every gaze lingered there briefly, as if each soldier read the inscription in their mind, then kept it to themselves. The drill was random shooting. Each soldier picked a spot on the range map, then fired at a target hidden behind natural terrain, grassy hills, dirt mounds, deep pits. No instructions, no preset timing, just wind, gravity, and a cloaking silence. She moved between stations, watching wordlessly. Sometimes, she knelt, resting a hand on a shooter's shoulder. Sometimes, she glanced at the flag's flutter to remind them to check their trajectory. But mostly, she let them handle it, as if passing something on without ceremony. When the last soldier's turn came, the one who'd laughed loudest when she first entered the classroom, he took the position. Eyes through the sight, hands steady but cautious. He waited. The wind stilled for a second, then he fired. The bullet flew, quiet, on target. But what stopped everyone's breath wasn't the shot, it was his glance back at her as if waiting for something. She gave a single nod, then turned away. The session ended. No one rushed to leave. They gathered around her, not in formation, not called to order, just standing, like markers circling a center. And when she spoke, no one interrupted. Her voice was the same as always, low, calm, never rising, never breaking. War doesn't teach you to shoot well. It only forces you to shoot to survive. But it's in the quiet, on days like today, that you learn why you must aim true. Not to win, but to avoid a second shot. Not to kill, but to keep yourself whole when you return. No one responded. No one needed to. A strong gust swept through, snapping the flag upright one last time like the earth's silent applause. She walked slowly toward the camp gate. Each step is unhurried, unheavy, but behind her, no one turned away. They stood watching until her figure vanished past the old storage sheds. She didn't look back. She didn't need a farewell, and she didn't need her name called at the closing ceremony. And true to form, the departure came. No drums, no paperwork. Just the next morning, her desk was empty, the board wiped clean, and no more boot prints marked the damp concrete. But in every soldier's notebook, on the last page's margin, there was a line they'd written not because they were told, but because they needed to remember shooting isn't to prove you're strong, but to prove you're calm when it counts. And at Fort McCoy's range, where winter pressed on, where new recruits stepped into sniper classes, someone would still point to the old target post at the field's end, where a coin was once split in two. No one said her name, but everyone knew there. A lesson lingered, unfading. A lesson not in any manual, not printed in books, but carved by a bullet that never needed a second shot. She didn't leave to applause. And we, hearing this story, don't need many words to understand. Some choose silence. But that silence echoes louder than any blast. If you've ever been underestimated or ever had to prove yourself through action, not words, this story is for you. Share this video with those who need a spark of quiet strength. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And if you have thoughts, leave a comment. I read everyone, I mean it.